Those that don't have an internal monologue, what is writing like for you? JG Zeroy said. I had no fucking clue this was a thing, and am shocked at how prevalent it is. Obviously, no sense in how much of thy population don't have an inner monologue from this thread, but it's obviously a lot more than I'd have guessed, if, like I said, I even knew this was a thing. I can't tell if this is like a deficit or if it's just different. Saw one comment where someone said they used to have one but now they don't and they think it might be related to trauma, which I could totally get. If someone gets hurt enough then perhaps their inner self just kinda clams up and they kinda run on autopilot? Like to me inner monologue equals thoughts, like people are saying I don't know what I'm going to say or write until I do it in this thread, and to me it's just like, so you're not thinking before you speak? Does that mean they just don't think, they just kinda act? I hope this doesn't come off as insensitive. This is just such a fundamental part of what I thought it was to be a human and then I find out it's like, not, and it's totally blowing my mind. Zucchini said. I used to have an inner monologue when I only spoke one language. Once I became a bilingual, I noticed that I started thinking a lot more abstractly rather than always vocalizing my thoughts. I theorize this change happened because my proficiency in my native language deteriorated and my inner dialogue never transitioned to my second language. It's not like my mind is blank, I just have more trouble putting what I'm thinking into words. For example, when I wrote this comment, I knew exactly the thought I want to convey to you but just didn't go through the effort of putting it all in plain English. Imagine when you want to say something but you can't remember the word and it's just on the tip of your tongue. It's kind of like that. Bing Bing 279 said, I totally agree with what you're saying about the inner monologue becoming abstract. But I feel like I'd have to disagree with the implication that it deteriorated because of a breakdown of the first language and lack of development for the second. Your thought process has become conceptualized into the ideas that the words represent rather than only the words. Then when you want to speak, you have to translate those ideas into the correct ideas into words. What's extra difficult is when a concept exists that is easily expressed in a single word in one language but does not have an equivalent in another. But there's nothing wrong with you. Your thoughts have just become idea-based rather than being word-reliant. Panic at the Restaurant said, this is exactly how my mind works. People always think OMG you're so random, like talking to you is so interesting, you have such a random train of thought, you know things about different topics. In the meanwhile, I'm like, I only know these things because my brain won't shut up a single minute. And even when I'm busy, my mind's like, hey, have you ever wondered about Paperclip's design story? And then I just have to dive into some sort of investigation because I need to know. So if one day someone mentions design in a historical context, I'll remember the day I read about paperclips and share that with the person. And I know to others it's weird, but to me it's just how my mind works. Also, I've struggled lately because the past several months I've been using English more than my native tongue. And I notice how that affects the way I construct my thoughts and the way I communicate with others. My mind's mixing all the time. Not just my native tongue and English, but other languages I speak too. It's really frustrating. I think this is the first time I ever read about someone who understands this and lives the same way as me. It's amazing. For a long time I thought I was maybe just wrong, because I noticed people around me don't function like this. A Park Trip expert said, yeah man, I totally get what you're saying. It reminds me of the book, The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, which basically says mankind's inner monologue was probably different thousands of years ago and the growth of modern religions and, like, ancient Greek philosophy was a result of this tension in different forms of inner monologue. So if I want a sandwich I think bro, I want a fucking sandwich. I'll go into the kitchen and get it. But why early man would have a distinct voice saying get sandwich. It's a bit tenuous at times but is pretty weird in an interesting way. Like, it makes you rethink a bunch of things, even if it's bullshit. So the first line in the Bible is, probably, I can't remember, in the beginning was the Word and the Word was I am, which is about the first humans who started hearing and understanding their own consciousness and the concept of me in their brains. Man, even writing this down is spinning me out more. I need some beer. April Dawn Believes said, I don't mind the inner monologue. I hate the music always playing in the background. WTF, does my brain play music non-stop? I don't ever listen to the radio anymore. Luna Ziggy said this happens to me all the time after I recently listened to a new song that I've never heard before for the first few times. You see, I'm very good at quickly learning song lyrics and at remembering them for a very long time. Some days, a song will pop into my head that I haven't heard in years and I'll be able to play back most or all of it in my head. And whenever my inner monologue isn't saying anything, the silence is to be filled with some kind of music. So, the snippet of a recently listened to song that my memory knows the best keeps repeating on loop inside my head. I've heard that a good way to get a song out of your head is to finish listening to the song all the way through, but I can't do that if I only know part of the song, so I'm stuck listening to just one section of the song for what seems like forever. Beige Sportsman said. Same. It depends what I'm thinking about. If I'm cleaning the house, then I'll be talking to myself in my head, planning the day and whatnot. Same for shopping or other mundane stuff. If I'm writing music, it's all colors, shapes, textures and movement. Same with cooking. Though I would say I have an internal monologue when drawing, which I wouldn't expect. If I'm socializing or playing video games, I'm not in my head at all. If I am, then that means I'm having a bad time. Actively thinking about this is weird. Stanes Throwaway 24601 said. Honestly, it's just a snap decision when doing any writing. I don't think about the words before I speak or write, they just come out, and it's just editing from there. If I'm writing a story instead of just a letter, I'll try to picture a scene more like I'm describing a scene in a movie, then adapt as needed. Fix Me 59 Bug said. I hate my internal monologue. When I am typing or writing, my brain will combine what I am typing with my internal monologue saying what needs to be typed next, and suddenly I am skipping letters or words. Ches221 said. If you have one, you know. You just don't. To explain, the inner voice is the same as when you speak but without using your vocal cords, only in your head. And it's automatic, no choice. When I read, I hear my inner voice reading for me, same when I write. And when I think, I can hear myself thinking. Zergling1 said. Thinking gets even weirder. If a deaf person learns sign language as their primary form of communication, they tend to think and dream in sign language. So their inner monologues are performed by engaging the pathways that would normally activate motor neurons in their hands and arms. Just like thinking in a spoken language engages the throat and ear pathways. Again, thinking definitely predates language, but thinking in a language doesn't necessarily mean talking or hearing. Some crazy shit. Cuthbert the Destroyer said. I don't think it's exactly the same. If it were, I'd only be able to read as quickly as I could speak. My inner voice is there, but kind of in an abstract way, like a ghost of a voice. I think I have the opposite as well. When I hear words in real life, I have a sort of inner typewriter where I can see the letters of the words. But again, not completely, as if I'm looking at a page of text. Astrabungo said. I used to write novels when I had one. Then one day, after a lot of trauma, I think, my inner narrator just vanished. Haven't been able to write much since then. Which is sad. I was working on a really good trilogy, but I just can't anymore. And if you mean just writing things like this comment, I'm just writing my thoughts right as they come out. IDK, how to explain that? Max Fortitude said. These are the kind of things I truly believe therapy with certain drugs can help with. The way I see it, the inner monologue is effectively shut down as a defense mechanism so that it doesn't hover over those traumatic thoughts. When taking drugs like MDMA and discussing it, you can think of the memory in a sort of abstract way without the emotional aspect of it becoming overbearing. Through this, I believe we can rethink the experience as, although very painful, not debilitating. News and Sequeen said. Yep. It's weird. Logically, I know the person is me, but at the same time it feels like someone else is talking to me. I've actually used this to my advantage a couple times. I've had some really hard introspective days where I felt like absolute garbage. Just loads of self-loathing, not a fun time. I took a minute to talk to it on purpose. Anytime I talk to someone, I try to see them as beautiful souls with their own dreams and hopes, so I wanted to do the same with myself. And for a moment, that brief disassociation allowed me to step out of my own head, and see myself with the same love that I see others with. It was uncomfortable and vulnerable, and I cried. But I walked away with a better introspection, I think. Beyond Electric Dreams said. I see myself as having 2 me's upstairs, Logic brain and emotional brain. Logic brain is, well, logical. She understands cause and effect. She looks for people's intent when they do stuff. She's convinced by facts. Emotional brain is a drama queen. Someone not responding to me? They hate me. I'm just overbearing and annoying. I made someone feel bad? I'm literal garbage. Why would anyone like me? Logic brain knows they're just busy, and that I never intended to hurt anyone. But she tries to convince emotional brain of that and gets nowhere. The trick is then listening to and acting on logic brain's take, while also letting logic brain translate emotional brain's feelings and concerns. It's weird, but it works for me. I drive too fast said. You should look into the theory of the bicameral mind. It's the idea that at the beginning of human evolution, people did not experience metacognition or understand that the voice in their head was their own thoughts. People interpreted that inner voice as being God, as though it were a deity speaking to them. If the voice in your head told you to follow a dry creek bed to find a source of water, it was God giving you instructions. As human evolution continued and we developed metacognition, we learned that the voice in our heads was our own, and the deity vanished. According to the theory, around this time is when prayer began to not work anymore. Prior to the advent of metacognition, humans would pray to God and receive answers when the voice in their head spoke back to them. After the development of metacognition, however, the deities went silent. Sofa scientist said. Words just come out and I put them down on the page. I don't think of how I'm going to word something, I just have a general idea of where I'm going with the narrative and the words flow out instinctively. I don't really know how to explain it, but it's as if I'm writing on autopilot. I was astonished to find out that some people have internal monologues. It seems like it'd be horrible to have a voice in my head all the time. My brain thinks by making spontaneous connections between concepts, but that's just me, and I'm sure other people without internal monologues think in entirely different ways. I can imagine a voice in my head, or another person's voice in my head, but only if I choose to do so. Sometimes while reading I will softly narrate the text to myself internally, but not always intentionally, nor every time. Edit. Upon further thought, the best way to describe how I write something would be that I'm translating on the fly, from what are simply concepts in my mind, to English. Raman Rasparis Orbit said. I'm not up, but that's about right for me. I don't hear my voice speaking in my head at all, or any voice really. I just kinda read the words and the concept within just sort of translates itself to my understanding of the situation. It's like if someone walked by and looked upset, I don't think the words wow, they look upset, I just perceive them as being upset. I'm really bad at telling stories verbally because I don't really know what to say until I'm already saying it. Pablo Leon 95 said. I can imagine all the details of the apple, about as clearly as I could see an apple. It happens to me when I'm alone and suggested. Have you ever as a kid walked down a dark hallway and felt that there was something behind you? My mother would tell me that the worst thing you could do is running or looking over your shoulder, as you'd be more likely to actually see something and have a distressing experience. Today I'm 22 and still have those feelings. Sometimes I'm in the bathroom with the door open brushing my teeth and it would be the only light in the house, and if by just a moment I feel vulnerable, I'd clearly like the day see something unhuman charging at me at great speed. I can force my brain to make that happen during the day, too, but it's way less vivid. At night, however, it's another story entirely. If this means I have an hyperactive brain, it helps me visualize scenes taking place as I write as vividly as one would see a scene in a movie, but the trade-off is wearing me out. Humanoid 1013 said. I don't think I have internal monologue. I have to force it. It doesn't happen naturally, ever. When I write fiction, it feels like I'm watching a movie inside my head. I see the characters and hear how they talk, and I also hear the narrator. On the other hand, when I write on Reddit for example, my thoughts just come out of my fingertips as I write. I never hear my own voice or anything like that. I never think in a voice when I'm doing something. Is that what you mean by internal monologue? Maddie80 said. This thread is fascinating to me because I assumed that everyone has an internal monologue until I realized that I have no sense of internal vision. People apparently read books and can envisage the events described therein, but I seemingly can't see something unless I am literally seeing it. As an example, I could describe my wife in total detail if she were standing in front of me, but given that she is not, I would struggle to describe her at all. She has blue eyes and is attractive to me, but otherwise I only know that I would recognize her by sight. This is fucking me up. I'm also becoming aware that I don't actually know what I look like unless I'm seeing myself in a mirror. It is seemingly key that we all look the opposite of what we assume because mirrors present us the wrong way around. Yeah, this is weird. Big Bite 3 said, "Holy fuck, I just learned this is a thing. For me, words, sentences, paragraphs just flow. I'm not much of a storyteller, but I can write some great academia papers on the fly. I don't hear a voice. I can't even force myself to hear a voice. It's just silence and I conceptualize the words. This explains so many things in my life. To make matters more interesting, I actually confuse myself if I try to think something out. I have to write my thoughts as they flow and go from there. I work as a software developer. Trying to think out new projects has always been a challenge. Reading is different for me. I read, I absorb some, read again, absorb more and move on. I don't actively recall what I read until I have a question or problem in front of me that correlates and I can visualize a word or phrase that then satisfies the issue. FML, thanks for this op. Mrecrismith said, "Dude, this thread is destroying my brain, lol. I thought those little voices in people's heads on TV shows were just another trope, like the little devil angel on a person's shoulders. I've never been able to write outlines for papers or anything like that, but have never gotten below a B on a paper if I even sort of know the material, and usually a C if I barely know the material. I enjoy reading, but it's never a voice that's reading to me in my head. I understand the words, I can remember what I've read, sometimes, and can connect what I read about to my own global experiences, but it's never a voice. I literally cannot tell if I have an internal monologue or not." The Masked Hamster said, "That my thoughts don't form words by default doesn't mean I can't have thoughts of words. When I need to imagine speech, I do. The difference isn't that a person with an internal monologue thinks in words and a person without an internal monologue lacks that ability, because typically it isn't a form of aphantasia. Rather, we all think in abstract concepts and a person with an internal monologue automatically generates a monologue from it, and often isn't aware of thought that isn't internally vocalized. The only time it has felt limiting instead of freeing is when I tried to use dictation software to write prose. I couldn't manage to think of the things I wanted to say and vocalize them at the same time. I don't know if that's the same for people with an internal monologue, if that is because of the way I'm wired, or if that's just because NICE never exercised them together." The MCM80 said, "If this is a thing, is it then impossible for them to play out a conversation in their head? I often think ahead about important convos, and it is in my head as if it is being spoken out loud. I can monologue those words internally for both parties. Without that, you'd have to say it all out loud? I'm still confused as to what defines this idea of no internal monologue. To me, that could be something as simple as practicing the opening part of my speech internally. So they do not have that ability?" Had to Respin 1 said, "So by definition, internal monologue, when you decide to write down a thought, doesn't it indicate that the first thought that comes to mind is written down? When I write, I am constantly thinking about the words I will use. Especially when I'm writing a novel. I often have to get up from my chair, walk outside, and sit in a chair and run the dialogue through my mind. Suppose I have the character driving in his car, and he says to his friend in the passenger seat some words. Then, I think to myself, well, that doesn't sound natural. And I can go through this process iterating the monologue over and over, until I like it. Or, if I'm asking for something important, I may talk it through, in my own mind, 5, 6 or 7 times. Each time iterating on based what I think the response is. How do you iterate through your thoughts? Without an internal monologue?" Hopla Scarabao said, "I will admit people with aphantasia are probably not as creative as the average person. I certainly am not. I'd be much more apt to write nonfiction. People also wonder how I can think without visualizing, and all I can say is I just do. I grasp concepts really well, and always did great academically. I can put thoughts to paper easily, but in my head it's a general understanding of things. I can use words in my mind when there's a purpose for them, but most of the time I'm just taking things in. I am a conceptual thinker as opposed to a visual one. Perhaps having no internal senses or monologue makes me more aware of my actual senses. Or not. I'm just me." Shit Zero Stir Animus said, My thought process is very much impulse, feelings, and visual ideas. I can, sort of, read in my head. But if I start trying to do very much, I start mumbling out loud to myself. My mind wanders a lot too. I mostly only read audiobooks now, because it's a much better experience. That said, writing is a little difficult. I get ideas and impressions for things that feel cool, but it's very difficult to sort out if it is going to sound cool until I've written it down. Even then, if I do a poor job of articulating what I wanted to say, I might think it's still cool and try to convince others otherwise, and even try to rework the idea several times. It makes describing things much easier for me than most people though. I can focus on a feeling or texture or taste or smell in the dark of my mind and focus on finding words to explain it.